Hey, folks, greetings and welcome along to the podcast today. Great to have you here. Now, we've got two fantastic guests joining us for the live stream and for the audio podcast. I'd like to welcome along both of our guests, Philip Carden and Mike Carden. How are you doing there, Philip? Start with you.
Doing very well, Paul. Sitting here at home, getting used to it.
How are you coping?
Really well. So I've got a couple of younger kids, both going to school. So that they have been experiencing virtual schooling for the first week last week, and starting to get used to that. And it's going well. It has its ups and downs.
Yeah. And Mike, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. I've got teenagers, so I just let them fight amongst themselves.
You don't have too many problems with them trying to steal all the bandwidth at home.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Like I one of the kind of unsung stories of this whole crisis in New Zealand has just been how well the telco networks have stood up. It's quite amazing to me, like shifting everyone to work from home and everyone to schooling from home and so on. And we haven't really had it. Yeah, you might expect it kind of almost to collapse around your ears, wouldn't you? But it's just without a beat generally.
Yeah, I think it's going pretty well. There are challenges as we've moved from work offices where we're usually all well connected up with very robust connections and move to maybe random parts of a house where Wi-Fi can be variable and so on. But we worked through those things, and hopefully we won't have too many technical challenges today. Well, let's jump in. Philip, maybe we can start with you. Today we really want to talk about the startup that you and Mike have found about Joyous, but I'm keen to hear a little bit to set the scene about your background and looking through the things that you've done in the past. You've had a really quite a varied career. You spent a decade at Alcatel-Lucent, and I was just fascinated about your different roles as Vice President of Strategy and Innovation. Then you were the Chief Technology Officer and the Chief Marketing Officer for Asia Pacific, which is probably quite an unusual combo. And the Senior Vice President at Global Head of Consulting Services, and that was just your time at Alcatel-Lucent. Maybe you can just run us through a little bit about that journey that's got you through to co-founding Joyous.
Yeah, so I think that thing of kind of like a combination of sort of sales and marketing and technology is kind of there all the way through. From the time that I spent 6 years in New York running a consulting practice there back in the 90s, focused on security and telecommunications. The time in Paris and Shanghai with Alcatel-Lucent got really interesting towards the end because like Alcatel-Lucent's now part of Nokia, but back then there was about 80,000 staff in the organization and half of those were billable. So they spread across 3 divisions. I ran one of those, and so as a business group, we had like 40,000 professionals, serious professionals, in 110 countries, and so that idea of kind of like not having any idea of like what people, what is the employee experience, and not having any levers to pull. So I sort of have the practical experience of that. But that said, I mean, I guess I'm kind of more known as the technology side of this founding partnership.
Yeah, interesting. And what were the biggest takeaways of having a team? Effectively, you've got tens of thousands of people spread around the world. What were if you had to pick a couple of learnings from that have put you in good stead with what you're doing now? What would have been some of those takeaways?
Well, I mean, the thing I think is interesting, right, is that there's no feedback loop, right, and none of the sort of traditional sort of 1970s approaches to feedback of kind of like anonymous surveys and that kind of thing actually help at all, because they're sort of very measurement focused, and they never actually provide any sort of context to the data, and they're very slow, right? So that whole thing of like, how can you just like build a culture into an organization where feedback is a live thing that leads to action? You can kind of, it's not about like executives understanding what's going on and initiating big change programs. It's how do you sort of drive that feedback culture right out into the organization. And I mean, that's where we sort of got to with Joyous as one of the core ideas, is that like, people are just not quite taking the right approach to a really important area, which is getting feedback from staff and doing something about it, and making that kind of just like a natural part of how you do business every day. And so, Joyous is all about kind of encouraging conversation. It's not just about measurement. It's about like every interaction being an opportunity for small incremental improvements, because we encourage conversation around these important topics. It's not about, change having to be something that gets structured somewhere sort of way up in some ivory tower or whatever. It's like distributing the insights all the way through the organization and letting people sort of react straight away. Great.
Yeah. Well, I think, your practical experiences there, obviously, very, very helpful in helping you design and build Joyous. Mike, tell us a little bit about your background. I think in New Zealand, you've had a fair bit of coverage over the success with Sonar 6. Tell us a little bit about that journey that sort of brought you to this point.
Yeah, look, it's funny, isn't it? Like we started Sonar 6, which was a human resources, software as a service business in 2006, right? Which is the very beginning of software as a service. In fact, I don't think we realised we were software as a service for a while. I do, in fact, remember going to a kind of a Sandhill Road VC meeting, and somewhere during the pitch, one of the partners said, "Oh, so you're a SaaS business?" And I was like, yes. Later, looking it up on my phone in the car and discovering, in fact, we were a SaaS business. That business was doing performance reviews, and it was I guess one of those scenarios where it was a market opportunity, wasn't it? It was we figured out there was a billion people in the world who kind of had an annual performance review, and most of them were dissatisfied, and we sort of said, hey, if we can put that online and charge people, $30 a year for that, then there's a $30 billion total available market, and that's kind of where we started. And we built that business from 2006. It was acquired in 2012 by Cornerstone On Demand, and then I got the opportunity to spend 2 years on the leadership group of Cornerstone, which was a NASDAQ listed SaaS company. So kind of went from the early stage New Zealand SaaS growth business to being a kind of I guess a quarterly driven NASDAQ listed SaaS business, and they had experience at both ends of that scale. And subsequent to that, after that, I spent some time working in different businesses in New Zealand, different tech businesses. Primarily, I discovered that I'm kind of native to enterprise SaaS, and did some governance work and invested in a few businesses and got involved. And then sometime a few years ago, said, okay, it's time to use the experience and some of the capital we got from the Sonar 6 period to build something new. Excuse me, and it's really an interesting period to build something new, right? Because in the early days of SaaS, building a SaaS business was very much just about taking an on-premise piece of software or some kind of on-premise process like performance reviews and putting it online, and that's the beginnings of Xero is just putting accounting online, isn't it? Salesforce putting CRM online. So that was that phase, and we're suddenly in this new phase where actually we're delivering on things like applying machine learning and microtransactions and integrations and all sorts of things which really change the way that people work in the corporation. And so it's an exciting time to re-enter, and the piece of employee feedback, particularly in large organizations, and helping people actually have a more meaningful work experience, and in fact improving the lives of working people was a kind of purpose that I was personally quite committed to. And went about trying to find someone to found a business with, and particularly find a tech co-founder, and lo and behold, after a while of searching, I contacted Philip, who was in Paris at the time, and said, "Hey, why don't you think about doing a startup and leaving your cushy enterprise job?" So that was kind of the genesis of it, and we capitalized it a couple of years ago, and really have been going for a couple of years, running very, very hard.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Well, let's dive in to that. But before we do, I've heard in the past that you've sort of shared one or two sort of key bits of learning from Sonar 6 and that period after Sonar 6 was acquired and you were part of the bigger listed entity. And there were one or two sort of things that you came away with in terms of realizations. Are you able to sort of share the most valuable bits there? I think particularly from a sales perspective, and I guess this the sorts of customers that you ended up going after and so on.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And that very long question actually worked well, because my Chrome froze for exactly that period of time of that question, Paul. So fortunately, came back to life for me. So that was quite awesome. So look, I guess that I've told the story before, but it's a very sort of pertinent one for my journey, which was that after Sonar 6 focused on the SMB market, and I think that the reason we focused on small and medium business was partly because we just had a maybe lack of confidence in ourselves. It was the first time we built a software business. We were kind of a group of people who'd kind of met through cycling. It wasn't like we came from some established tech background, and we I thought, I guess, that maybe the SMB market would be a little bit more forgiving and easy for us to work in. And so after 6 years of building that business, and in software businesses, SaaS businesses, you're very focused on building your ARR, so your annualized recurring revenue, the subscription money you get every year. We had I guess a revelation. So we're acquired by Cornerstone, and Cornerstone, they weren't SMB native. They were much more focused on the enterprise. And literally, a couple of weeks after we were acquired, they won the Nestle business worldwide, in performance management. And that Nestle business by itself was worth as much as all of the ARR, so all of the recurring revenue we built in Sonar 6 over the preceding 6 years. And so I was very much like, wow, it's the enterprise is got this kind of advantage of scale that we hadn't been able to take any notice, any advantage of ourselves. And I remember thinking at the time, well, I wonder how Cornerstone got into enterprise sales, how they started to chase the biggest companies in the world. And so I sat down with the CEO and asked him. And at that point, Cornerstone were 12 years old. So it's like, what at the beginning, how do you make the step from small businesses to bigger business? He goes, we just started targeting enterprise at the start. And you realise that in their first few years they got one or two large enterprise customers, and that's who they went after, and they built deep relationships with them. They built that business. And I think that's that's the same model. If you look at some of the great New Zealand successes, Anaplan's a good example. A company where actually they went and targeted some of the biggest companies in the world right at the start, and really kind of built themselves with that. And that requires a certain level of confidence. And I guess that you maybe have that confidence more if you've been through a cycle. And so that's certainly what we've been doing in Joyous, is targeting the world's largest companies.
I think that's fantastic, and probably not a natural approach to take as a New Zealand startup, to necessarily be able to join the dots up. But so I think I appreciate you sharing that, because sometimes I guess as Kiwis we look so much at our own market, we may not really get our head around what is the most strategic approach. And right now as a country, we really need to be investing into our long-term future and making those plays that are going to play out over the next 5 or 10 years, and deliver really, really good results, but they're going to take some time. So rather than just I guess approaching what we know and what we're familiar with, which in New Zealand, I mean, I don't think we have a single business with anywhere near the scale of many of these companies like Nestle, certainly in terms of New Zealand headquartered businesses. So that's a great story. Thank you. Now, who wants to sort of share? And I'm really interested in you both got talking about doing a startup together, but how did you actually nail the idea for Joyous and decide to get rolling? How did that actually come about?
I don't think that we started off with an exact idea of what we were going to do. We started off with the idea that we were going to do something, first of all, that we're going to build an iconic New Zealand tech business. That was one of the things. And the second thing, more importantly, was that we were going to be doing something that's like part of the solution rather than part of the problem, right? Because based on sort of where both of us have got to, why would you do anything else, right? And if you look at what are the great unsolved problems of the world, well, there's plenty of people working on many of them, but one of them, people spend an awful lot of time at work, and around about half the world's population works, and so if you can make life at work better for people, you make a significant difference to the world, and so that kind of fit it with that aspiration, and at the same time, it's a space where there's nothing particularly interesting that's happened for a long time, right? So I sort of referred to this sort of 1970s approach to feedback. So obviously it's kind of, the industry has modernized a little bit. They've taken sort of that 1970s philosophy and kind of put it online, and sometimes they do surveys a bit more often, but that's kind of the extent of the evolution, right? And so it's just none of that stuff is lined up with where the world's at, right? We have, half the world's working population is just completely used to the idea of associating their names with comments and all other facets of their life. And as soon as you sort of break that model and say, feedback itself should be open, you just open this really interesting space where suddenly people leaders can take action as a result of that feedback straight away. People feel in these large enterprises, people do these annual employment surveys, or maybe even kind of more frequent anonymous surveys, and nothing ever seems to happen as a result. It's almost like a joke. If you were to go out there into enterprise land and say to people, nothing ever happens as a result of annual surveys, everybody agrees with you, and that's just how much of an opportunity there is in this space to kind of do stuff differently. And so, at the same time, you've got senior executives, chief executives that are wanting to build a transparent culture or an inclusive culture or more of a trust-based culture. And if you think about that stuff, transparent culture and anonymous feedback, it just doesn't compute at all. It's what's the world been thinking about in this space for the last 30 years? So, we just saw this really exciting opportunity to do some good in the world, and in a space that's sort of pretty much wide open.
That's great.
Yeah, and it really is a case of if you want to impact the most important thing first, you just want to give workers a voice, right? And working people need to have a voice that's heard and understood and responded to, and that's actually how you start fixing work.
Now, how did you get actually off the ground and get started? Philip, I think you mentioned to me that you started doing the coding yourself. Tell me about those beginning days, with getting an initial offering that you could show off.
Yeah, so Mike and I both write code, and we both did write code together. And in fact, I think it's just like a philosophy that we have, right? That as we grow the business, we get involved in every part of it so that we understand that part of the business. And clearly, in in this kind of business, one of the most important things is engineering. It makes sense to start there, and that also has the advantage that you can actually build something. So we took it through to a prototype that was implemented in a New Zealand corporate, and that whole process of kind of building the software over about a 12-month period when we would still sort of say that we're in kind of like project stealth mode, if you want. Just a really, really sort of fascinating time in terms of with new ideas, because you don't start off with understanding exactly which are the pieces that are going to like kind of revolutionize the approach in a particular market. And so that was really interesting, and also gives you a good understanding of kind of like what you're trying to build in terms of an engineering team. So when it came to the point where we got a lot of outside investor interest, we were entirely ready to go out and sort of start building a world-class engineering team and attracting the kind of people that that you need to do that. Partly because we'd spent quite a bit of time kind of understanding what it was that we were looking to build.
Right. Yeah. I mean, certainly pretty helpful having a local customer that you're able to able to work with, but also being in the position. I'm picking where you could afford to self-fund for for that initial year or so until you went looking for further parties to invest. How did you sort of transition from that initial sort of building that initial version or concept and starting to try that out into actually bringing investors on?
Yeah, look, I guess that that sort of period of iteration, where we're kind of working out what we're doing, and we're trying to understand the architecture and understand exactly what the product offering looks like, and get a bit of kind of enterprise customer feedback on that, is really where you start to kind of hone your pitch. And so I mean, I think that we made a deliberate decision to do a kind of angel or pre-seed round and involve some institutional investors in that, right, and get venture-driven investment at that point. And that was quite deliberate. It was a very deliberate step that we thought that what we will do is once we sort of commercialize this, we'll do it on the back of pre-seed angel investment. Pre-seed venture investment. And the reason for that was that sort of long term we had a view that we will, eventually, although we could have self-funded that first round, ultimately you want to have large investors on board who are capable of meeting the investment requirements of the business if it's successful and it's growing the way you want. And so it was like one of the deliberate steps, I think, Paul. And then the actual piece of that was like, okay, well, we now know that's kind of coming up, and we went and pitched to a number of investors that we'd previously had some conversation with, and some other interest developed, and we quickly kind of closed a modest seed round, or sort of pre-seed round, should I say, which is a really kind of almost pre-product, pre-customer round. We have a customer running a prototype product, so we have that, but that customer is not a customer, and they're not paying us any money. So it was a kind of pre-revenue type round, and that was always part of the plan, right? The good news is that you can get those rounds away in New Zealand these days, and so, or New Zealand and Australia, and so we brought on board Airtree Ventures in Australia, and Tahua Fund in New Zealand, or part of Icehouse Ventures in New Zealand. So able to do that round in a very kind of contained geography.
Yeah, that's certainly very helpful. I'm sure it made a big difference that you came to the table with a lot of experience and expertise that you both brought. Did it still take what sort of time frame did it take you to go through and get that funding? Because I know it can be incredibly distracting. It, but becomes quite a key part of what you have to do often in a startup is raising funds. And for a lot of folks, the funds don't come in when they need them or want them, and they're having to lay off and dump members of their team depending on where they are in that journey. And the disruption, as we've heard on some of the other podcasts, can be pretty extreme. I'm picking in your case, probably a little bit easier than some of those scenarios because of the proof of past things and the experience that both of you had.
Building an organization like Joyous is kind of a journey that starts a long time back in your career, isn't it? So I guess that the experience that Philip had in his enterprise roles, and certainly the work that I'd done with others in building Sonar 6 and building that through funding and through acquisition, is really the stuff that lands you here. And likewise, even within our team, our senior people, their time at Spark or at Vista or at other places has really kind of brought them to this position. And so I guess that this iteration was certainly a lot easier from a capital raising perspective than the Sonar 6 iteration, partly because the marketplace is different. It's certainly much more institutional capital or capital generally available in 2018 when we were doing that round than there was in 2006 when we were funding Sonar 6. That said, pitching a business, you've got to do a good job of it. We took a serious tilt at it, and we had an objective to get what we considered to be the most appropriate and best VC on our register, which was Airtree, and so we targeted them, and we obviously targeted others, and Airtree were the one we chose. And I think that whole process was only a matter of weeks long. It certainly wasn't that much longer. But let's not ignore the fact there was a preceding kind of I guess 12-year period where we had been involved in lots of other SaaS businesses and talked about lots of other ventures and so on. And the reality of it is that it certainly seems maybe easier for us to raise capital, but capital investment is a risk return game, right? And so if you've got, I guess, founders with some track record, then you've got a lower risk, and that makes you more appealing. And it's that simple. Yeah,
agreed. Now, I'm keen to hear, obviously, in the current time we're in, where there's a lot of distress and pressure on businesses. Staff are dealing with all sorts of challenges. I think in your case, you've gone from working in an Auckland office to everyone being operating from their home locations, and this sort of thing is going on everywhere, of course, around the world. What are your learnings in terms of actually how do you create that environment when you are spread out? You don't have control over things in the normal manner. How do you create the environment, the culture, to really have everybody working well together and being happy?
Yeah, so it's kind of just the little things that make all the difference, I think. So like we have, we have a very unique culture. It's a strong culture. You kind of expect that we focus on culture because we're kind of in the business of employee experience. But part of culture is that you have rituals, you have things that you do, right? And so like there's the obvious things like daily stand-ups and retrospectives and stuff like that, and they just sort of like naturally move online. And then there's the things that don't as obviously move online. So, like we used to have team lunches every couple of weeks. And so, we sort of transitioned that to a Zoom meeting where people sort of have lunch on Zoom, and, they use the Zoom background to have a picture of like the food that they like to eat or would like to eat or something like that, just sort of be silly with it. But like where it got really interesting for us was the stuff around celebrations. So it just so happened that like we had, prior to going into lockdown, we had a couple of people that were doing their second anniversaries. So we had we had balloons and a bit of a celebration in the office. We also had our first person go on maternity leave. So that was a huge celebration in the office, and the office was full of balloons. And so like we kind of go into lockdown with like this thing going on around celebrations. But like just shortly after lockdown, we had another 3 people with like anniversaries. And so it's like, so how do you make that special online? And so like for the first one, we developed this thing. Like we discovered sometime last year that like that none of us mind drawing. We're all bad at it, but we'd kind of like gone through this sort of thing where we had drawn pictures of each other. And so for that first celebration, we did the online, I think we did it on Zoom, with the backgrounds as like the picture of the person drawn by each individual team member, and then they had to kind of like guess who'd drawn who, which was sort of like a fun game. And then for the next one, we just ramped it up a notch, and people had to make like a sculpture of some description, some kind of 3D object out of stuff that they could find at home that represented that person. And then for the third one, because like once you start it, you've got to keep going. We did that thing, they do with the museums where you take the famous paintings and you've got to try and make the same painting with stuff that you find around the home. So we did that with like photographs of this person. And I don't know, that's just like an interesting idea of how you can kind of take stuff that kind of worked well in normal life, and sort of translate it in some way so that you have the same kind of feeling when you're in this world.
What we're noticing most, and we notice this in our clients too, Paul, is that companies that have a strong culture to start with are able to transition fairly naturally to letting that culture express itself in a distributed environment like this. Now it's sometimes a thing where you have to be quite explicit and work hard on it. But if you have a kind of tepid or weak company culture to start with, very, very hard to build company culture in this environment. So it's really from our perspective, we're saying, okay, let's see how we take the things which are good about our culture and make sure that they exist and continue to work in a work from home and distributed environment. But we're starting from the point of having a strong culture. Yeah, we certainly do see the challenge in some of our large clients, and some of them are getting very, very active at working out how they maintain culture in in this kind of environment. And what I can say from my sort of early observations is that in our client base where people are very, very focused on it, and that's the lines of that wider, I guess, Joyous clients, they're managing to maintain that culture, even though they've got a mix of essential workers, work from home, and all those sorts of things. Whereas I certainly see the experience in some large corporations where it's very, you can sort of see even a month in the culture is starting to drift because they just don't, they maybe didn't have a very explicit culture to start with.
One of the things that is interesting, though, with the situation we're in, right, is that like nothing is what it was before. So people have got very much used to the idea of change. It's really interesting, if you're looking for kind of like a silver lining around culture, the fact that there is kind of like an expectation that stuff will just be different at the moment kind of introduces this opportunity to do stuff differently. So, being much more sort of transparent or oriented towards, trust building in the culture, that's a big step for some sorts of organizations to take. But I've definitely had a few conversations recently where people have recognized that like that sort of like expectation of a change at the moment is like an opportunity to introduce change. It's quite interesting, I think.
Yeah, that's a great observation, and certainly I've seen it with my team that we're in the process of, I guess bringing through some key changes. So when we come out, that we're in the absolutely best position that we can be in, and I think there's really an opportunity to build a lot of unity, with a team. Everyone is focused. I guess there's a little bit of that sort of wartime mentality of, hey, we've got to get through this, we've got to win, and yeah, if that means some change, some personal sacrifice, that people are willing to do it, for the greater good, whereas they're not, sometimes, life can be at a bit of a different pace, and trying to sort of, bring changes is, can be quite an uphill battle at time, right? People don't usually like change, but right now, I think, you'll get people buying into it much easier than usual.
What is there's a meme going around that says, who is driving digital transformation in your business? And it's like, is it the CTO, is it the CEO, or is it COVID-19? And there is this I guess, appetite, like you've both mentioned, for change in the enterprise at the moment. And if you're thinking about change and you're thinking about what occurs, we've actually got this huge driver right at the moment towards technical innovation in organizations, or technological shift in organizations. And the idea of using more tools to communicate with your teams and so on is very, very natural currently, right, in this current environment.
Yeah. Now, I'm keen, if you could just talk, maybe Philip, a little bit to how Joyous works for those that are using it. How do they use it? What does that look like? How do what are the touch points from a staff perspective? And then, what do you do with that data as it flows back? Who gets access to see it? Because you've talked about, Joyous taking this, fresh approach that's different to the traditional sort of, 70s and 80s type, anonymous feedback model. But how, in practical terms, does that actually work?
Yeah. So, I mean, we create structured open conversations, and the way that works in a very concrete way, is sort of, Joyous is a very flexible tool, so you can set it up in different ways. But the most common way to set it up is that staff get a message once a week via email or via SMS that asks them a question on a particular topic. And so, those topics are flexible. We'll come to what those are shortly. But the very first question will kind of like get them into the space of that particular topic, and then straight away we'll ask them to make a comment about that topic, right? And as soon as they do that, the experience of doing that, by the way, is just like using, WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger, something like that. So, if you're a digital native, it feels modern. You can attach photographs if you want to. If you miss the whole social media thing, it just feels like using SMS. And so it's familiar to everybody. And, people can make comments. They can do that on their mobile phones. They can do that on their desktop. And that comment will appear straight away in your people leader's feed. So the person that might be your manager, for example, it appears in their feed, and they can see your comment straight away. They can see an image if you've attached one, and they can respond to it. And the way that we set it up, Joyous is aware of the organizational structure, right? So, when we integrate into the HRIS system or Active Directory, or people upload their organizational data, Joyous will automatically self-configure itself to understand how the organization is structured. So you get lots of fine-grained control over who can see what. But the most common way that people set up Joyous, simply because it's easy to communicate to staff who can see what, is that your manager can see the feedback, and then their manager can see it, and so on up the hierarchy. And obviously that varies a little bit for agile organizations and so forth, and we're really good at handling agile organizations and other modern organizational structures like matrix organizations and folks that look after projects and all that kind of thing. But whoever it is that can see your feedback, that feedback will appear in the live feed for them. They can respond to it, and that response will come through on your phone straight away. So it becomes a conversation. And what's really interesting about that, right, is that, first of all, because you have your name associated with stuff, your comments are much more constructive and often quite a lot deeper, more elaborate. So there's a whole lot of value in the commentary itself, right? And so not only are we creating this ability for people to, to surface issues that might need action, and also to share appreciation, that kind of thing. So kind of like the instant incremental improvements in the employee experience. You're also creating this richness of insights because we can use machine learning to do theme extraction on the comments themselves. And lots of people sort of talk about kind of theme extraction and machine learning and that kind of thing in this space, but like the thing that makes it different is that we get like a much higher rate of comments. We get a lot more comments, and they're deeper comments, and that's the stuff that actually makes it practical to extract the themes. So it's a sort of pretty exciting kind of loop.
That's great. Excellent. Well, I'm keen to get your feedback from both of you around these current times we're in and how we should be thinking. There's I guess dealing with the here and now, the current financial challenges that a lot of businesses are needing to address, whatever those look like. And of course that that can be quite varied. For some businesses they maybe don't have a future at all, so there needs to be that thinking of, well, what next, what's going to be the next business, and taking that approach. For others it's sort of looking at, well, how do we navigate this in an X period of months ahead, whether that's 2 months or 24 months or however long it sort of takes to get through this period where COVID-19 is causing a level of disruption, and then there's that, I guess, that sort of longer term thinking. Mike, what's your view on on an approach to sort of thinking about these things, and not just being tied up in the immediacy of the pressures, but being able to be strategic during these times?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think the first thing to acknowledge, Paul, is that COVID-19 is a lottery in a lot of regards, right? And I obviously at a health outcomes level, it's a lottery, but at a business and the economic level, it's a lottery too, right? And so, I mean, in Joyous, we're fortunate, and we work in the employee feedback space. Our clients typically are in infrastructure, telco, pharmaceuticals. It's we're not immune to the effects of the environment, obviously, but we're nowhere near as impacted as, say, someone who makes software for, I don't know, organizing cruises or something, right? So there is, and that's not based on some kind of great planning on our part. That's just, kind of the way that the dice, have rollen at the moment. So there is, I mean, I'm sort of just acknowledging empathetically there's lots of different situations for different people. And so the first thing I think that people get into in this mode is the existential piece, right? Which is, can we survive long enough to get out the other side of this? And the challenge with that statement is not so much, can we survive? It's like, when is the other side of this, and what does the other side of this look like? And so, I think that what we're, my kind of suggestion on this has always been that, like, there's this one mode of kind of getting through this next period of, where lots of countries are in lockdown and lots of clients aren't doing anything and so on. But then actually land in a very unpredictable recessionary environment, right? And in that recessionary environment, well, you've got to look at how your business can not only survive in there, but you really do have to thrive, right? So if you take a mindset that says, hey, look, at some point in the future we're going to need to raise capital again, right? Now that point in the future might be immediate if you're very, very short of cash and suddenly you've had a drop in cash flow. But in a more common scenario where that's a number of months away, you might actually find that it's not about just getting through the next 3 or 4 months. You've actually got to get into a mode where, hey, if I don't want my capital raise to be hugely dilutionary, I'm also going to have enough runway to start to show that the business can grow again, and that we actually can survive in the next environment, whatever the future economy looks like. And so I think that there is this thing where you go, okay, well, how do we plan that out? As soon as you get into that mindset, I think it's important too, to think about that thrive piece, and to think about how you do grow, and it's no different than any other business scenario in that it's competitive, right? That there is what you're trying to achieve at the moment is you're trying to achieve you're trying to take advantage of the opportunities that are in the market. So at the simplest level, if you're in a business like ours, it's quite hard to close deals currently, just because large enterprises, it's not that they don't have a requirement for what we're doing, but they've been very distracted over the last little while with other things. They have all sorts of pressure on their top line, probably if they're a universal type business, and so that will slow the sales process. However, at the same time, from a marketing perspective, suddenly the field has got wide open. There's marketing costs are coming down. Our target audience are people in senior roles and in human resources and employee experience roles too. Actually, have more time. We're very, very relevant to the conversation. So our time to shine is right now. So I look back to the GFC and you look at what happened there. That's when a lot of companies really built their category. Companies like Salesforce are a good example. They built themselves through that GFC, right? And so, I don't want to be overly optimistic because that's the incorrect stance. But the thing is, if you miss the opportunity at the moment, you're equally as disadvantaged in a way as if you just face into the existential challenge.
Philip, did you have anything you wanted to add into that conversation?
I think that sort of characterization that I think when we went into this, we kind of, our sort of initial strategic analysis was that we were going to face sales inefficiency and marketing efficiency, right? So marketing costs would go down and sales efficiency would go down also because sales cycles would get longer. I think we're starting to kind of feel like the second part of that is not necessarily true. There's other things that are sort of maybe counterbalancing that. It's potentially just for our kind of business, right? But I think that whole thing around kind of openness to change is an effect that I hadn't really anticipated, but that seems to becoming quite real. We definitely see deal flow as a result of that we wouldn't otherwise have seen. Now it's too early to say whether that turns into to sales efficiency, but that is sort of an interesting observation. Yeah,
thanks. And what sort of sales cycle do you have as a business? Because you are, your deals tend to be fairly big. I'm presuming going after such large entity, and so that tends to mean it's quite a long cycle.
I think that our cycles are varied as you would expect, right? And look, our deal size is large. It's like 6 or 7 figure deals, right? So what we typically find is that things either go to an RFP or they go to a pilot. If they go to an RFP, typically might take a few months to get to the RFP, and then a few months afterwards. Pilot typically takes a little bit longer, but they're not. The thing for us is that given that we often replace existing kind of annual survey processes or something, there's typically some kind of cadence that they're already used to. So in the enterprise, sales cycles can be brutal, but we're not seeing that at all.
Yeah.
Right at the moment, we're seeing some deals happening very, very quickly, Paul.
Yeah. Well, I imagine some businesses recognize the advantage of getting on board with what Joyous is able to provide in terms of that immediacy of feedback, and even just checking in on people's health and well-being when they're not in one place, and how else can you do that without generating a whole lot of new work if you've got a tool that makes that very easy and collates the feedback and creates those conversation loops. Then, but I mean, it seems a pretty natural thing for people to be wanting to get in place right now, which is great.
Yeah, and important to remember too, right? It's not a case of everybody working from home. There's still all the folks that are involved in essential services, and essential services is not all just sort of like people working in hospitals and that kind of thing. It's folks like going into people's homes to fix their broadband connections. It's a good example, right? Those people obviously, in different parts of the world have some pretty real concerns about how their work life has changed. And then you have the people that simply can't work, at the moment doing the job that they usually do because there's just no way of doing it. And so what we find with sort of like enterprise scale employers is that they have all three of those categories typically within the organization. And so it becomes really interesting. And what we're finding is that like the flexibility to sort of tailor the topics to individual organizations is actually much more important during this time than is maybe normally the case, right? So, we do lots and lots of work on the science side of Joyous, right? So structuring the question, making sure that we're asking the right questions in areas like, fairness and inclusion and well-being and engagement and cultural environment and all that sort of stuff. And quite often you can use a question set from one organization to the next. But in these times are kind of like big changes where like people's workforces are being affected in such different ways. You really do sort of need this ability to be really tailoring feedback and even response models. By that, I mean like who it is that's actually going to respond to a particular piece of feedback. That sort of flexibility has become really important. And so fortunately, it's something that we're kind of designed to do. We always set out to, be the feedback solution that would work for all employees, right? So like, part of kind of like our idea of inclusiveness is including everybody in the conversation. So, it doesn't matter whether you're in head office behind a desk or out in a truck or up a tower or whatever. The idea is to make everybody's voice an equal part of that conversation. And I think like in this peculiar situation that we're in at the moment, that's even more important.
Yeah, agreed. Now, I mean, we're sort of ducking and diving a little bit, but I'm curious about the growth of Joyous. How's that looked? What did you plan out in advance, and how well have you stuck to those sort of estimates? Because of course, now's a time where things are pretty unknown. I mean, it sounds like now's a time where a lot of businesses could be and are paying attention to what you're doing. Obviously, that's going to vary a lot for businesses. Some are going to be really flatlining or otherwise at this time. But how's that journey been since? When was it that you started with your first paying customer?
Yeah. So look, I think that we're closely held, and we don't just disclose our revenue figures per se, but I can kind of give you some indication. So we've been in a very kind of logical stair-step plan. So I mentioned that in the first instance, at the beginning of 2018, we raised a small venture-led round of $1.2 million, and that was really to start what we were doing, right? And the outcomes of that round was to get 4 enterprise customers using the product the way that we described, also to build the technology and to build the core of an engineering team. And once we reached that step, we would raise more capital, which we in fact did. So late last year, we raised another sort of $4 million round with again this time led by Airtree Ventures, and that was really on the back of that kind of early success. We've subsequently lent into that, and we've added more enterprise customers, and we're being careful that we add them at a rate where we can learn and work with them and turn them into evangelists, rather than just sort of just add them to the revenue line. They really have to become part of our sort of early team, and so that's on track. We certainly have some very large clients around the world. We have a Fortune 10 company on the roster now, deployed to a large proportion of their staff. So we're on the trajectory we expect.
Excellent. Oh, well done. That's it's very encouraging to hear, and I think everything I've heard so far certainly suggests things are tracking for you very much in the right direction. We're just about out of time, but I'm just wondering, what closing advice that you can offer to to those leaders and others that are listening into the podcast in terms of learnings that we can leave them with. Maybe start with you, Mike.
Yeah, look, I mean, I guess my kind of consistent place I've landed is that for a while I was sort of thinking about how things would go back to normal. Like what the world would look like when it kind of returned to the way it was, and how that would work from a business perspective. And I think the kind of opportunity in this actually is thinking about or trying to understand what the world will look like. And realize that actually will be very different, that there's actually not a return to exactly how things were. And whether that's because there's more of a drive to to digital transformation and within the enterprise, and we've become more cognizant of the people around us, whether that's our workmates or whether that's our neighbours. There's a lot of things that I think actually change in the environment. And so rather than kind of picturing how your business will survive and work and how long it will take for stuff to return to normal, it's nice to try and orientate yourself, if you can, towards thinking about, hey, what will the opportunities look like, and what will be a very new world.
Great, yeah, that's good advice. And anything from you there, Philip?
Yeah, I mean, just on the same thing, right? It's like really just sort of a case of understanding that, like, there's plenty of things going on that are not the way that we would choose them to be, but there's also a set of silver linings, and just sort of like focusing on what the things are that that this enables in terms of change, in terms of doing things differently. I think that's absolutely valid. And then the second thing at a much more human level, just remembering that everybody has something else going on in their lives at this time, right? It's just the way you have to think about kind of everything you do at the moment is that there's a lot of complexity in people's lives. You probably can't see most of it most of the time, and so just sort of like being kind, giving people a little bit extra space and understanding and all that kind of thing. I think that's something we all should be doing.
Yep, that's always good advice, and especially now. So, where do people look online to if they're interested in finding out a little bit more about the business? Where is Joyous online?
Yeah, joyoushq.com.
Excellent, that's great. Well, thank you very much, Philip, and thank you, Mike. It's been a real privilege to have you on the show. Thank you for taking the time out to share some of your story and your advice. And we'll look forward to following the Joyous journey. And I'm certainly keen to have a little bit of a look at your product, and possibly some of our listeners will too. So all the best.
Okay, thanks, Paul.